We take a look at the Nashville Predators, their offseason moves, and more on this edition of Locked On NHL Game Night.
When that final horn sounds, you know it's time for Locked On NHL Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. Prepare to experience game day reactions like never before, only on Locked On NHL Game Night. Your team every day.
Hey, hockey fans, welcome to Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thanks for making Locked On NHL Game Night your place to get a recap of the night in the NHL during the regular season and the playoffs. We are available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is right around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your future bets now. I'm Eddie Garcia, an LA Kings fan on the West Coast. He is Shukri Wrights, a Boston Bruins fan on the East Coast. Together, we are normally discussing all the goals, saves, big moments, and stories from the night in the NHL, but obviously it's the offseason. We got no games to recap, but we're here to help you get ready for next season by previewing all 32 teams between now and opening night. And before we bring in our local expert, Shu, today we're going to learn about what's going on with the Nashville Predators.
I'm excited to get into it with our guest, Ann, in just a few moments, but this episode has got me in a mood where I got more questions than presumptive answers in my mind. And frankly, the Nashville Predators were the one team that I thought that was really the most disappointing in last season. And now get the opportunity to talk more about it and look ahead to the next season just coming up shortly.
Yeah, I agree with you. I have some questions as well. So let's get right into it and welcome in our guest. Excited to have one of the co-hosts of Locked On Nashville Predators, and that is Ann Kimmel, going to give us her insights on the team that she covers every day. Hey, Ann, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
Hey, guys, I'm doing great. I'm going to give you the best answers that we have, but it's a little bit like locating the Bermuda Triangle and figuring out what that's all about, too.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, it might be a little much to think you have all the answers to what happened. But I do have to start with last season. And I was one of those people. I'll raise my hand. I thought the Predators were Stanley Cup contenders. You're a playoff team the year before. You bring in Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault, guys who have won cups before, still talented players. And you go from a playoff team to not making the playoffs. So the obvious question is, how did that happen?
It was actually a mix of a number of things that came together to create a season that my co-host Emma and I have been honest about saying it has aged us like two-term presidents. Those 82 games were so tough. And I think there's a lot that goes into it. You mentioned the additions of Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault, and we were all really excited about that because that was going to address the goal scoring issue that Nashville had, that they needed to get over that hump and become a competitive team. And yet Nashville finished the season second fewest goals scored in the entire league. So you really have to dig deep to figure out what went wrong with this team. And I think one of the things that we have to be really honest about is that when you add pieces like Stamkos and Marchessault, you have to allow for a transition that was really difficult. You're talking about two players who had every intention of playing where they were. I mean, this is Steven Stamkos, who has never known another home locker room in his Hall of Fame career. Very suddenly finds out, not only am I not staying in Tampa Bay, but I am coming to the Nashville Predators. And I think, those are two very highly talented professional athletes, but I don't think you can minimize how difficult those transitions were for those two players to make off ice and on ice. And then I think there was maybe in the locker room what we refer to as a very subconscious deferring. You bring in these two amazing caliber players, and then I think everybody in the locker room is figuring out, where do we all fit together in this offensive structure? Now, it wasn't all offense that was the problem for the Nashville Predators. Defense had its own struggles as well. We dealt with, of course, injuries later on in the season to Roman Josi, earlier in the season, Jeremy Lauzon, Adam Wilsby. So there were a lot of factors that came together. And once the snowball started going down the hill, this was a team that couldn't figure out how to stop it. And so they spent all season trying to battle back and just not finding their way out of it.
when you look at Barry Trotz and his plan, to me, it seemed as if that he had a plan to rebuild and contend at the same time. Kind of like similar to what another general manager in the NHL by the name of Don Sweeney trying to do in Boston, with very mixed results. But in this case in Nashville, with, dare I say a strong word, disastrous results so far. So my question to you, Ann, is what is the philosophy for Barry Trotz? Like, is he trying to truly rebuild, or does he still fully believe that this team can be a contender? Because I think there's more questions abound in regards to his philosophy moving forward.
Yeah, last season really raised a lot of questions about Barry Trotz's plan. But I will tell you this, we refer to it on the show as the now and not yet. Barry Trotz is investing in the now because he has pieces like Philip Forsberg, because he has Roman Josi, and because he has UC Saros. He feels like there are pieces where this team could be a contender. And that is why he went out and added Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault. The upside for Nashville Predators fans, and you really got to look for one after last season, but the upside is that those additions didn't cost Barry Trotz's plans for the younger players that are coming up. So there is a now plan, and that plan does not look good after last season because the veterans underperformed. But there's also a not yet. And the good thing about what Barry Trotz has done is he has not cashed in chips on the future. You know, he has not traded a lot of the big pieces. Now, granted, Yaroslav Askarov, the goaltender, he did move him out, but he has not given up a ton of draft capital. He has not given up some of Nashville's bigger prospects in the pipeline. And so even though last season was a disaster and we have yet to see what's going to be different this coming season, there is still a part of the not yet that is very possible for Nashville, but we're looking at 4 to 5 seasons out. Can they do anything with the roster that they have now in the next 2 to 3 seasons? That is a big question after last year.
And it certainly seems to me from the afar that they're running it back with the same crew. We've got the same coach. We've got the same veteran guys. There wasn't a lot of movement in the offseason. Is Barry Trotz saying, you know what, last year didn't work out, but we've kind of ironed out what happened and we're just going to run it back? I have confidence in these players that I picked up. Is that what they're doing? And do you have confidence? Because was there ever a point last season where everybody kind of gelled and you thought, okay, this is the team that we thought we were going to see? Did that ever really happen last year? And if so, is that what we're kind of banking our hopes on for the season?
That didn't ever really happen with any continuity last season. You would see glimpses of the potential, but the team could not consistently put it together. And that's a big concern. Yes, you can do it, but you don't play hockey on paper. Yes, this team would look good in a game or two, but they couldn't consistently keep playing up to the level that they were capable of. In a lot of ways, Barry Trotz is running it back. And one of the things that we debate on our show is he undercorrecting? Because last season really was, and I say this kindly, but it was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster for this team. It was a disaster for individual players as well. But I do think what Barry Trotz is doing is being careful not to overcorrect, because the season before you had this team that was not expected to make the postseason. They went on a historic 18-game point streak. They made it into the first round. They lost to Vancouver. And so you have some takeaways about Andrew Brunette and some of the players from that. Then you go to last season and you look at a Steven Stamkos and a Jonathan Marchessault. You look at a UC Saros and you say, now I know who these veteran players are and we didn't see it, but surely it's still there. So in a lot of ways, he is running it back and he is trying to figure out which season was the fluke. Was it the season where the young players overperformed expectations, or is the fluke, wow, these veterans fell apart this year, but we're going to get it together? So there have not been a ton of moves. They did add a couple of players to the blue line, but overall, Barry Trotz is going to run this back and really try to figure out, what do we have here?
All right, we'll get more into the Nashville Predators offseason, including how hot is the hot seat for head coach Andrew Brunette. We'll do that and more here on Locked On NHL Game Night. The NFL season's almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready to kick off with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using the FanDuel app. It fits however you like to bet. Player props, building same game parlays. You can even jump in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little extra fun to your Sunday. So if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com, the place for your first $5 bet. All right, we are continuing with Ann Kimmel. She is one of the co-hosts of Locked On Nashville Predators. Shu, why don't you lead us off with this round?
When I look at our locker room and I look at the leadership group, as a Bruins fan, for years I was spoiled with the likes of Chara Bergeron and the ilks of those men. When I look at Nashville and I look at the leadership core with Yossi, Philip Forsberg, Ryan O'Reilly, the alternate captain, and the list goes on. And with the leadership core that is as strong as there is in the NHL, and the way that the season fell apart for this team, how do you assess this leadership group in terms of any sort of maybe locker room like adjustment that they need to make? And as well as, and lastly, do you think that the leadership group bears a lot of the blame as to what went wrong in Nashville last season?
Yeah, I think you're right on a couple of counts there. I do think this is one of the strongest leadership groups in the league. You know, you've got Roman Josi. A lot of people here in Nashville have said Roman Josi is so quiet. You don't need a captain to yell. You need a captain to command a locker room. And that is what Roman Josi does. Philip Forsberg is another one. You mentioned Ryan O'Reilly. Ryan O'Reilly has been such a huge difference maker in Nashville as well. Then you add Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault. And I think that the leadership group does bear, and I will tell you, they do accept a lot of responsibility for last season, because I think they had to figure out how it worked. You know, Steven Stamkos talked at times about, you know, for 18 years or 17 years, I was the guy who had the answers. All of the sudden at this point in my career, I'm the guy that has the questions. You know, he was a captain and now he's coming into a locker room with another captain. And I do think that they had to figure out how to talk to each other. Steven Stamkos had to figure out, hey, where do I speak up and speak in? Where do I sit back and learn how this franchise does things? And that is a leadership group that has taken a lot of responsibility. Philip Forsberg recently talked about the fact that the leadership group sat down with Andrew Brunette, sat down with management, and they really aired they had a festivus, if you will. There was an airing of grievances as far as this is what we didn't do. This is what we need to do. This is how we have to work together. So I do think that that is one aspect where they have been having really honest conversations in the offseason. And I do think you're going to see that be better. I want to be careful to say, I don't feel like there was ever any turning on each other. We refer to it as gerbling. Nobody ate their own young in that locker room. There was not like a locker room conflict. They just didn't know how to kind of mesh it together. And that is going to be better. And they need it to be better because, of course, Nashville is bringing in some of these young players. And you've got to have a cohesive message from your leadership group for these young players.
And I mentioned it earlier, head coach Andrew Brunette now going into his third season. So he was there his rookie year. They make the playoffs, but obviously was at the helm last year with the disaster that we're talking about. And we know this is the NHL. You know, guys like Dan Bilesma get fired after one season in Seattle. So you never know about job security when it comes to head coach in the NHL. Seems like Barry Trotz has been very patient with Andrew Brunette to this point, but I mentioned it earlier. How hot is the hot seat? How much do the Predators need to get off to a good start for him to keep his job this coming season?
I would say if you want to be a head coach in the NHL, you want to coach for a general manager who was a head coach in the NHL, because Barry Trotz has grace in abundance because he has been the head coach before and he has a good idea of where is the responsibility on the head coach and where is the head coach the guy who's going to take the fall. And Nashville Predators fans have had to wrestle with that because this is a fan base that was really not happy with Andrew Brunette last season, and Barry Trotz stuck with him and has, came out at the end of the season and said, Brunette is my coach. We've worked on some things. We've had some conversations. He gave Andrew Brunette some things he wanted him to work on over the course of the offseason. I don't know that his seat is as hot as we think it should be. because Barry Trotz really has a lot of patience when it comes to the head coach. Now, the Predators absolutely have to get off to a hot start, and Andrew Brunette has to fix some things. We talk about the leadership group, we talk about underperforming veterans. There were also some coaching decisions that I think set the team back last season. And that had to do with, a line blender, just these veterans came in and weren't given consistent line mates. And, Steven Stamkos is going to perform better with consistent line mates because we've seen it. And that he didn't have that. So there are adjustments that Andrew Brunette absolutely has to make behind the bench for this team. But I think Barry Trotz is going to have a lot more patience than the fan base and than a lot of other general managers would have in this position.
Hey, Ann, a quick follow-up on Barry Trotz. Is there any chance, do you think, if he were to make a change, he'd come down out of the press box and coach the team?
You know what? It's so funny. People speculate about that all the time. Does he just want to get back there behind that bench? I don't think he would. But it is an awful popular topic. Now, I will say this, some of Barry Trotz's, he has been beloved in Nashville for years. After last season, some of that is cooling towards Barry Trotz. So I'm not sure how well received it would be at this point. I just think Barry Trotz is learning what it means to be a general manager. He cannot confuse that with what it means to be a head coach. And I think he is learning how to navigate that. He is learning that he has to look at this from a different lens than the one that he has always done in the NHL. I don't think it would happen, but man, wouldn't it be a great storyline?
I mean, he's a Hall of Fame head coach. There's no doubt about that. So,
yeah.
Absolutely. And you talked about the younger players earlier on in the show, and there's a few of them I actually want to touch on. Defenseman Tanner Molendyk, who caught my attention last season, and forward Matthew Wood, who played in the final 7 games of the Predators regular season last year. But then also not to forget about guys like Fedor Svechkov and Zach Lehurux, who made the debuts last season as well. But they're all expected to compete for starting roles on this team last season. So my question to you is, what is your expectation for the young guys that's going to be competing for roster spots during training camp and the preseason?
It's going to be really interesting to see how some of these young players perform. You mentioned Zach Leroux. He played in, I think, 68 games. So he really has NHL time under his belt, but that was a learning curve for Zach Leroux. So this is one of those players who takes nothing for granted. Just because you were on the roster for a long stretch of time does not mean Andrew Brunette is going to give that back to you. So I think he knows he's got to come in and really compete well in training camp. Fedor Svechkov is really getting an opportunity with the Predators, because let's face it, the one thing the Nashville Predators don't have are centers. They do not have a lot of center depth. So 21-year-old Fedor Svechkov has an opportunity to be the 2C on this team and play with the likes of a Steven Stamkos, or to play with the likes of a Jonathan Marchessault. He really has to step up, but he was one of the few players that we saw linear growth from last season. So, that's a player I think Barry Trotz is expecting a lot out of. Tanner Molendyk is a super interesting one. This is a young defenseman that Andrew Brunette has basically begged to have on the opening night roster. And Barry Trotz, who is a fan of over-marinating, is like, no, not yet. Tanner Molendyk skates like Monet paints. Like, his skating is just incredible. You watch him skate, and it really is art. And science, because he gets back when he needs to. I wouldn't be terribly surprised to see him compete for a spot. If he doesn't make the opening night roster, that is a player you're going to see in the NHL this season, and you are going to notice him in the NHL this season. So Tanner Molendyk, I think, is interesting. Matthew Wood is going to compete for a spot. He came in, like you said, he played at the end of the season, but you could see him get it. You could see this really young player coming from the University of Minnesota stepping into the NHL, and you could see him get it. He's got some growth, of course, but you can see where there's an NHL player right there. So it's going to be interesting to see what Matthew Wood does in training camp as well. There are a couple of spots where these players are going to have to battle, and it's going to be interesting to see who impresses Andrew Brunette in training camp enough to make that opening night roster.
All right, coming up, we're going to take a look at the projected starting lineup for the Predators and ask the question, will we see them back in the postseason next year? We'll do that next here on Locked On NHL Game Night. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, even plan long-term goals. And managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. And we have an important request. Locked On wants to hear from you. We put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your podcasts even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't like, and answer questions about our advertising. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes a survey will be entered for a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes, and there's also a QR code for those watching on YouTube. Thanks for helping us out. All right, we're wrapping it up with one of the co-hosts of Locked On Nashville Predators. That is Ann Kimmel. And Ann, going to throw up a little graphic here and take a look at the projected lineup for the Nashville Predators and tell us if this looks about right or if there are maybe some camp battles that may be going on and anything you want to add as far as this. So a top line of O'Reilly, Forsberg, and Marchessault. Second line is Svechkov, Stamkos, and Evangelista. Haula, Bunting, and Kimmel on the third line, and the fourth line of McCarron, Smith, and Leroux. Your defensive pairings, Yossi and Blankenberg, Shea and Barron, and Haig and Perbix, and a goalie tandem of Saros and Anunen. Is that look about right, or are there some battles, or are there some changes you think might happen for the start of the season?
This looks about right. The one area offensively that I would say keep your eye on is talking about Joakim Kimmel jumping into the lineup. This is a player the Preds have been super excited about. And this is somebody who I think may make the opening night roster. If they feel like he is not quite ready, I could see Zach Leroux hopping up to the third line. And you could see a young player like Ozzy Weisblatt slide in on the fourth line as well. This is a guy who just plays rock'em sock'em robots, but also has offensive upside. So he's a lot of fun. Defensively, training camp is going to be huge. The Preds signed Nick Haig and Nick Perbix. We call them the Nick squared. And I think it's going to be interesting to see where they end up. I can see a scenario where Nick Haig ends up playing top line minutes with Roman Josi. Barry Trotz has signed these two guys to pretty decent contracts, but the expectation is they are going to play above their experience. Now, are they going to be able to do that? That is going to be the training camp battle. So I could see a scenario where they would try Yossi and Haig together, Shea and Perbix together, and then maybe go with like Blankenberg and Adam Wilsby on the third line, or maybe Justin Barron. They love Justin Barron as well. He's kind of one of their project players. Defensively, that's where I really think there's going to be a lot of storylines coming out of training camp, because they have to sort out where they want these new players to go. And the talk is that those two players, the Knicks squared, are going to be battling for top 4 minutes on the defense.
Probably the biggest question I have tonight wasn't any of the questions that I asked previously, Ann. It's actually about UC Saros, because in light of being blunt, there are times where I watch Nashville Predators games, I watch that man on the ice in between the pipes, and I see him as someone who is just completely checked out mentally. And I find myself asking why, because this was someone who once upon a time took over the reins from Pekka Rinne when he retired, and he developed into a top flight goaltender in his own right. But UC Saros just flat out had not just a horrible year statistically, but if you watch the games, which obviously you did, but I'm talking to the audience when I say that. But if you watch the games, you just saw someone who was just completely either lost his confidence or mentally he just was not there. So my question to you, Ann, is how does UC Saros regain some of that confidence back, because he's going to need it again this season in order for this team to even have a fighting chance for the playoffs?
Yeah, UC Saros is key for this team. You talk about Yossi, you talk about Stamkos and Forsberg, but what you really need is top tier UC Saros. And you're right, we did not see that last year. It was statistically the worst season of his entire career. He had a below 900 save percentage. That is unheard of for UC Saros. And I think part of it was defensively, they struggled in front of him. But I do think there became a point where it got in his mind. He wasn't making saves that we know UC Saros makes. And so he does need a reset. I think the one thing that will help is he played in the World Championships. And I think that was very helpful when the season ended. He ended up having a really good run there at the World Championships. He had like a 945 save percentage, 1.6 goals allowed. So he really bounced back in international play. And what you want is that palate cleanse, especially for a goaltender, because that game is played between the pipes and between the ears. And UC Saros has to get that confidence back, and he's got to get that mental game back between the ears. So I'm really hopeful that that is going to pay off for Saros. And also, I think for all of these players, they all needed to just go. They needed to step away from the ice because they were trying to problem solve in real time for 82 games and they were not successful. So they all needed to step away and figure it out individually and come back. And UC Saros is one that I really do think will be able to kind of reset, maybe easier than some of the other players. So we are looking for a bounce back season from him.
I did want to ask you, there's a little bit of business still to take care of. I know you talked about this in one of your recent episodes. Luke Evangelista, who on the projected lineup that we had was on the left wing on the second line, 23-year-old winger. RFA has not been signed yet to a deal. Where are they with that? And also, Jonathan Marchessault's name always comes up in these trade rumors. Trade rumors are what they are. Is that just something on the outside, or is there actually something on the inside behind that?
I don't think there's anything on the inside behind the Jonathan Marchessault conversation. I think part of what it is here in Nashville, we are polite. We talk like Southerners. And Jonathan Marchessault in a locker room talks like Jonathan Marchessault. He talks like a guy who played in Vegas for years. He says the quiet parts out loud. And so I think that fuels some of that talk like, well, he's not happy in Nashville. No, he just says the things. And he doesn't say, bless your heart at the end of them. So I think that has fueled a lot of that. Jonathan Marchessault is unhappy in Nashville. No, he just says the things. So I don't think that there's anything to that, at least at this point. Luke Evangelista, for the love of God, get it done. This is one of those players that Nashville needs, where he is a young player, but he's got almost 200 games under his belt. Nashville has a void in their lineup, in their projections of players who are young but experienced. They have to have Luke Evangelista signed. And that's something that I think Barry Trotz will get done before training camp, because he does not like any kind of business hanging over. And the last thing the Nashville Predators need at training camp is a distraction.
When you think about the Nashville Predators in terms of where they currently are in the West, it seems like they already have an uphill hill to climb, considering where they were last season. But when you think about the bigger picture in terms of their playoff chances and their ability to contend in the Western Conference, do you believe that there is a way that the Predators can be able to crack the top 8 in the West? Because it just seems like you think there is a chance, and perhaps there is a chance, but there are other teams that could also be, maybe there's a surprise team in the West. Maybe there's a team that comes out of nowhere and makes the playoffs. So where do you see the Predators this upcoming season in the West?
We always joke on our show, it's the offseason of sure. If you told me the Nashville Predators run it back and they're about as bad as they were last year, I would say sure. I could see a scenario where that disaster would happen. If you told me they make the postseason, I would say sure. I could see a scenario where that would happen. If your top 5 players on this roster, Yossi, Forsberg, O'Reilly, Stamkos, Marchessault, if they just get back to their career average goal scoring, you add 37 goals right there. And that gets Nashville back in contention for goal scoring and being a team that is competitive, that could score enough to be in a conversation for a wild card. But none of it happens in a vacuum. And you look at this Central Division, there is not a team that's going to get worse probably in the Central Division. And I'm talking about Chicago. Even Chicago is going to get better probably next season. None of the teams that were ahead of Nashville are really looking to have any sort of a big drop off. Nashville could get into a conversation for a wild card, but it's not going to happen in a vacuum, and they will need other teams to struggle, and Nashville will need to play some of their best hockey, and they need to do it right away in the season to be a part of that conversation. It's an uphill climb in the West.
Well, the Nashville Predators will open up their season at home October 9th against the Columbus Blue Jackets. She is Ann Kimmel. She is one of their local experts following the Nashville Predators. If you're a Preds fan, you need to subscribe to Locked On Predators. You'll get all the latest news, obviously, opinions, and the rest of this offseason, all into next season as well. So you guys make sure if you're a Preds fan, you make sure you're checking out Locked On Nashville Predators. And thank you for this. Looking forward to getting your reports on the Predators during this season on Locked On NHL GameNight.
Thanks, guys. Love it. Can't wait to hopefully report some wins for you this time around.
Hopefully.
I know you can't. I know you can't. Thank you, Ann. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right, that'll do it for this offseason edition of Locked On NHL GameNight. If you want to put your comments, if you're watching on YouTube, in the comments section, if you're a Predators fan, you want to comment on anything we've talked about, please feel free to do so. If you're watching this and you wanted to get the season preview of your local team, of your favorite team, all these episodes that we've done this offseason doing these previews for the upcoming season are available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. I'm Eddie Garcia. He's Shukri Wrights. Thanks for listening and watching Locked On NHL GameNight, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day.